A new injury for the New Orleans Saints defense could make it tough to contain Arizona Cardinals quarterback Kyler Murray. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as the Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, Velus Jones Jr. as well as Chris Rumph are amongst some of the biggest key X factors for the New Orleans Saints as they take on the Arizona Cardinals. The Saints offense is going to have to figure out how to manage the exotic pressure packages of Jonathan Gannon and the Arizona defense. And we're going to kick everything off today with a look at Chase Young's injury and how it could complicate things dramatically for the New Orleans Saints defense. We appreciate you very much, as always, for being here with us, whether it's your first time or your next time, being here with us this time, making us your first listen, and being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. New Orleans Saints defensive end, edge rusher, pass rusher, whatever it is that you want to call him. Chase Young is probably likely going to be out on Sunday. To be fair, he has another day of practice on Friday to see if he can get back out there on the field. If he's listed as questionable, then he'll have his opportunity Saturday and Sunday to try to make it a game time decision to get back out there. But right now, dealing with the calf injury, which he suffered during Wednesday's practice, so another in-practice injury for New Orleans. Now, I'm not going to harp on the Saints too much for this. It's early on in the season. We'll see how things go. But that was obviously a big thing that irked them and created some issues for them last year, all throughout the season as well. To be fair, the Arizona Cardinals actually had two in-practice injuries on Wednesday. So this is also just an early season thing that NFL teams do go through. But obviously, if you're a team like the New Orleans Saints that have the extensive injury history that they have had over the course of the past few years, and all of the hard work that they've done with really phenomenal hires like Director of Sports Performance, Ted Rath, and others, this is something that is probably a little bit frustrating for the team, right? And so with that reputation there, it's one thing, but what's more important is how this impacts the game. And one of the biggest impacts that I think that not having Chase Young on the field would bring for the New Orleans Saints is containing Kyler Murray. Now, it's not just up to the defensive line to do that. Obviously, the linebackers help there. The safeties help there. Your star player helps there, right? That nickel corner star position, who we believe Alontae Taylor could be back this Sunday. And it might, I would even say is maybe trending towards being back this Sunday after having practice on both Wednesday and Thursday. All of these players have a role in limiting quarterback scrambles, and none of it matters if you don't finish the play when you get to the quarterback, right? There's only so much you can do in that case. If you can't finish the play, then the quarterback's going to make you pay. That's always how it's going to be. But without having Chase Young on the field, there's obviously a little bit of a drop-off of athleticism that you're going to have at that edge rusher position. Now, the Saints could make up for it. Guys like Cam Jordan, who's going to be as fresh as he's going to get over the course of this season in week one. Carl Granderson has slimmed down. He is a very athletic pass rusher. Chris Rumph is a very athletic pass rusher, a little bit, of that prototype of that speedy, athletic type of edge rusher. And then I would expect that Fadil Diggs, in that case, the Saints' 7th round pick out of Syracuse, formerly or by way of Texas A&M before he transferred, he's another one of those smaller, when I say smaller, I mean that very relatively, honestly, but I mean not 280-pound defensive ends. He's a smaller, more athletic and speedy pass rusher who can move, right? And who can move laterally and who's got a lot of good lateral quickness, all those other things. That's all helpful when you have these mobile quarterbacks in today's game, in today's day and age. And I think that the Saints inherently kind of get helped out a little bit here by what Brandon Staley asks these edge rushers to do. He doesn't have them lining up on the inside of tackles or over the top of tackles, having to deal with starting with inside leverage and trying to fight for outside leverage in order to get the edge. They're going to start outside the tight ends more times than not when they're in their 3-4 stand-up looks. And because of that, you have an easier job holding the edge because you are the edge in those situations. Now, is it always going to work perfectly? No, you're going to have a few times where Kyler Murray's going to get out, he's going to escape, and you're just going to have to be ready to kind of roll with those punches. Sometimes scorers are going to score, shooters are going to shoot. And that's just the way that it goes. And so New Orleans knows that they're not going to bat 1,000 on this, right? They're not going to go perfect on this, and no one should expect that. But it certainly gets a little bit tougher when one of the guys that you have planned on having all off season and who has been healthy all off season, who's been ready to go all off season in Chase Young, may not be available for the first week. Now, I will say, and this is important, that this does not sound like it is a long-term situation. The long-term outlook on this is very positive. It might just be the one game that he misses, maybe two. And I'm guessing, I'm like hedging when I say two. It sounds more like this might just be a one-game thing, and it's a calf strain and there's no need to rush it. But it's also true that there's no need to rush it. So if he needs a second week, then he needs a second week, but we don't know if that's going to necessarily happen. He gave an adamant response when asked if it was going to be a long-term issue in the locker room, when he basically said heck no in different words as loud as he could, or not as loud as he could, but with oomph, with emphasis, with power, and all those other things. So I don't expect this to be a long-lasting thing, it doesn't sound like, but certainly something that could jeopardize his availability on Sunday, and therefore jeopardize a little bit of what it is that the New Orleans Saints were planning on Sunday as well, or not jeopardize, but change it, certainly. And so I think those are kind of the things that you're looking for or are watching out for as you get closer and closer to this game. Saturday, there will be standard elevations. If Fadil Diggs is the guy that is one of the guys that gets elevated, I'll say probably along with Jack Stoll, depending upon whether or not they do some roster shuffling as opposed to using those elevations, then it kind of gives you an early indication of Chase Young. And it could be that when the injury report comes out later on today, that Chase Young is just listed as out. But if he's questionable, then at least that gives him an opportunity to try to get out on the field, whether it be through Saturday's walkthrough or a game time, pre-game kind of workout before the game to kind of see how he's feeling. The other thing that I think that this has a major impact on is your run defense, right? Like Chase Young was also a really solid run stopper for the New Orleans Saints last year. Like he is a complete defensive end in that way, as is Cam Jordan, and as does Carl Granderson aspire to be. And Carl Granderson was one of the Saints' best run defenders maybe over the course of the last couple of years, maybe not so much last year, but the 2 years before that certainly was that guy. And so I think you're good there, but I think that the other players that matter here obviously are Demario Davis as well as Pete Werner, those guys, and Danny Stutzman when he gets opportunities, but I think you're mostly going to see Davis and Werner, that those guys are going to have to keep their eye on Kyler Murray. The good news that the Saints are changing from going very heavy man coverage to zone and kind of playing these zone match coverages. Now, when you get into the red zone, that changes. When you get into certain down and distance situations, that changes. You will run man sometimes. Being a zone team doesn't mean that you exclusively run zone. It just means that you run zone slightly more than you run man. So you're still going to see man coverage. But when they're in zone coverage, having the opportunity to have their eyes in the backfield, seeing what the quarterback is doing, obviously has a big benefit as well. And I would imagine that star corner position as well, Alante Taylor or Ugo Amadi, again, we feel like Alante's on the right track here, obviously plays a big role there too. So all of those guys will have to sort of work together to maybe make up for what the team loses if Chase Young is not on the field on Sunday. We'll learn more on that later on today. Coming up next, the New Orleans Saints offense is going to have to communicate incredibly well in order to deal with this Arizona Cardinals pass rush. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. With football finally back, Prize Picks is the simplest and fastest way to get in on the action. Just pick more or less on 2 to 6 player projections, and you can turn your takes into real prizes in less than 60 seconds. You go over to Prize Picks right now. They're going to give you some extra help as well. They're giving you some max discounts upcoming this weekend. You can get Lamar Jackson half a passing yard. So if he has at least one passing yard, bang, there's a max discount for you. You go into the following weekend, Travis Kelce, half a receiving yard. You go into the third weekend, week 3, Patrick Mahomes, half a passing yard there. So a ton for you to get in on over at Prize Picks today. Download the Prize Picks app and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups when you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. All right, family. Jonathan Gannon and the Arizona Cardinals have some of the most exotic pass rush pressure packages you're going to see around the NFL, and it's going to take very sound communication by the New Orleans Saints to deal with it, and they're going to have to deal with it if they want a shot to win this game against the Arizona Cardinals. I want to go over some of the things that the Cardinals do, but I just want to tell you the bottom line here is that all of the countering to this, it's not necessarily game plan related. It's not necessarily, oh, you have to do this, you have to do that. There are some core principles to it in terms of, wherever, if there's a blitz, wherever the blitz is coming from, attack that area of the field. Sometimes Arizona, with some of the things that they do, they just kind of leave this massive void in the intermediate area. You got to be able to attack that and then send routes there. This was the big Pete Carmichael problem where there were never any routes over the middle of the field for some reason. Things like that. Like, we know Kellen Moore will have those routes. He loves crossing routes and things like that. So there's some core concepts that you'll use that inherently are ready to counteract this. But I'm going to tell you, the most important thing that the Saints offense has to do on Sunday between Spencer Rattler, starting center Eric McCoy, Kellen Moore on the sideline, the rest of that offensive line, and so on, it's going to be just communication. It's going to be all about communication. Everyone has to see the same thing and be on the same page. And that's not going to happen, much like we were talking about with stopping the run. It's not going to happen 100% of the time. There are going to be times, like Spencer Rattler is going to get sacked in this game. Kyler Murray is going to get sacked in this game, right? So you're okay with that. You just have to minimize what the damage is on those sacks and minimize what the damage is in terms of the number of sacks over the course of it. So as we go through this, just keep in mind that the most important thing is that the Saints will have to communicate pre and post snap, right? So on both sides of this. And then also are going to have to be seeing the same thing, adjusting the same way, reacting the same way, all of that. So this is where good coaching is going to make a massive difference. Guys like Kellen Moore, but also quarterback coach offensive coordinator Doug Nussmeier, quarterback coach Scott Tolzien, offensive line coach Brendan Nugent, and then I would even go to running back coach as well as assistant head coach, or associate head coach rather, Joel Thomas, in terms of the additional protection that you can get for out of the backfield for a Spencer Rattler. And so that's the most important thing here is communication, pre and post snap. So let's go over some of the things that Arizona does when it comes to those pressure packages. They have 1, 2, 3, I'll say 4 ways really of kind of creating pressure. The number one is your basic send 4, drop 7. And that's 11 players on the field. That's sending your defensive line and then dropping your linebackers, whatever collection of linebackers and coverage players that you have into coverage. That's a typical way of going about defense in the NFL. And so they do a good job of creating pressure even in those just 4 down situations in rushing 4 without anything necessarily showing you anything pre-snap in terms of pass rush. So what they'll do is that they'll disguise the safeties instead. So they'll show, middle of field open, i.e. a cover 2 or a cover 4. When we say middle of field open, we just mean no defender that's just deep and in the middle of the field, right? So that's middle of field closed is if there's somebody in the middle of the field. If there's not somebody strictly in the middle of the field and instead they're splitting the field in half or they're splitting the field in quarters with cover 4, that's called middle of field open because the middle of the field doesn't actually have one person in it. It's 2 people kind of on either side. And so what they'll do is that they'll show one look pre-snap and then they'll rotate one of those safeties either down in the box and then drop another one into the middle of the field, or they'll hold that look and actually play too high. And when they play too high, Jonathan Gannon will sometimes send blitzers, but other times you just send your 4 defensive linemen, maybe run a stunt, something to try to confuse the offensive line. It's pretty basic, bottom line, fundamental NFL stuff. So that's one way. The other way is to send a blitzer. And the reason why I just say a blitzer as a whole is because you're generating pressure by sending a blitzer that could be from the slot. It could be the linebacker. It could be a safety. It could be a corner. Jonathan Gannon is not afraid, and I'll extend that as well to Nick Rallis, the defensive coordinator. These guys in this Arizona Cardinals defense, last year at least, proved that they were not afraid to send additional pressure from anywhere on the field. And that could come from the secondary, linebackers, whatever. And so you got to be ready for that as well, right? Know where that's coming from. And if somebody is blitzing from that area or sending pressure from that area, checking in that area to see, is that open? Can I throw to that spot? Do I have a route that's going there? Does that vacate a zone that I can now take advantage of as a quarterback, so on and so forth. So it's a little bit of that kind of thought process there. This next one is blitzing. And so when I say blitzing as opposed to pressure, I'm talking about multiple extra rushers that are on the way, right? So you have your 4 down that are coming, but then you've got like 2 coming from another area, or you've got 4 down linemen and 3 are rushing. You drop 1 into coverage to replace one of the blitzing players, but then you still send 2 additional blitzers. So there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of go about the configuration of this. You can send 6, or you can still send 4 or 5, but because you're sending 2 from other areas, I would still consider it a blitz as opposed to sending your 4 down linemen. And so when they do this, sometimes they try to overload a little bit, or they show you pressure on one side, making you adjust to what they're showing you pre-snap. And then the guys that you adjusted to, thinking that they were going to come through the line or come after the quarterback, they drop into coverage, and then they send overload pressure on the opposite side of the field. They do this sometimes, Arizona does, and they do it to success in a lot of cases. So that's one of those situations where the pre-snap communication is really important. Hey, it looks like pressure is coming from this, make that adjustment. But then post-snap, when those guys drop out, you need to quickly be able to communicate amongst the offensive line, amongst the pass protection, where the pressure is coming from. And these guys, even well before the snap, well before the game, right? Just in terms of game planning, have to know what the rules are, right? If that happens, who's responding? Where are you going? Is the wide receiver cutting their route short so that the quarterback's got a quick outlet there over the top of the blitzer, whatever it might be? How do you take advantage of the aggression there? So, can you run a screen to kind of take advantage of that? All those other pieces. So those are the types of things that you'll see there. The final thing is what I would call simulated pressure or disguised pressure. And so when we talk about this, this is where like the game gets really, really fun and interesting and all this other stuff. This is where you're showing pressure, but then you only rush 4. So you're showing the linebackers threatening gaps on the interior, but then they actually drop back in the coverage. And then you run stunts and twists with your defensive line to create more confusion. So all of it is about confusion, trying to confuse a young quarterback and trying to confuse the offensive line. So communication is going to be the most important thing for the New Orleans Saints offense in counteracting this. If they can find a way to keep this pass rush and all of the different intricacies, all the different exotic things that they like to do, Jonathan Gannon, Coach Rallis, this Cardinals defense, it will give the New Orleans Saints the best chance that they will get to win this football game, and therefore possibly their best chance to win in September as a whole. Coming up next, I want to dive into some of the other players that might go unsung but can be major difference makers, including Velus Jones Jr. and edge rusher Chris Rumph. We'll get to that next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at Mazda. Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. They follow what moves them every time that they drive, and that's what makes a Mazda stand out. They go beyond safety, style, and performance to deliver a driving experience that feels alive in every single detail. Just like an athlete focuses on every single detail, Mazda does the same, from metallic accents to hand-stitched Napa leather. It just doesn't get any more beautiful than a Mazda. So whether it's a quick drive to practice or a weekend road trip, Mazda makes everyday drives feel more special. And they've also won more 2025 IIHS Top Safety Pick Plus awards than anyone else as of August 2025. So it's the small details that make the big plays, and there's more to every player. There's more to a Mazda vehicle. Mazda, move and be moved. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at DoorDash, who are powering this week's MVP on Who Delivered. And for me, the big delivery for the New Orleans Saints has been head coach Kellen Moore, who has brought culture, a revitalized connection with the community and hope back to this organization, at least for right now. As the youngest head coach, he's brought back gold jerseys, gold end zones. Manny Fresh is DJing at the opening game. There's a lot of positive possibilities for the New Orleans Saints as they move forward, and a lot of it is connected to Kellen Moore. So just like Kellen Moore has delivered for the New Orleans Saints, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays. And with DoorDash streaks, you can save every Saturday that you order, stack it up all season, and you could save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credit. Order this Saturday and keep the streak alive to fuel your game days only with DoorDash. Terms apply and promo period through November 18th. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. I want to make a habit of diving into some of the players that maybe don't necessarily get a lot of shine, a lot of coverage, but that can have a major impact in a football game. So sort of like an X Factors thing here. I'm going to try to come up with a creative name for it. If you have ideas, please feel free to fill me in. But listen, I want to start off with Velus Jones Jr., New Orleans Saints running back, because I think that there's three different areas where he can have a major impact on the game. Number one is, of course, as a running back, getting the ball in his hands on offense. And that could mean in the receiving area out of the backfield. That could mean lining him up in the slot, moving him out wide, motioning him out wide, and of course, him literally taking carries. I think he can have a pretty big impact. We did some bold predictions on our Saints Squad show last night. And I went with Alontae Taylor getting a couple of sacks in this game. I think that very much could be a thing. Remember, he had 3 in his first game last year in the opening game up against the Carolina Panthers. But I think Velus Jones, I almost said that my bold prediction was going to be Velus Jones Jr. leading the game in rushing yards, because he's one breakaway run away from leading the game in rushing yards with that 4.31 speed, right? And so I think that there's that area where he can help. Here are the other two things that I think he can do that are really important. Pass blocking, which he has shown a major propensity of doing. You go back to his time in Chicago, for instance. But then also special teams. For the first time since Rashid Shaheed has been a New Orleans Saint and healthy, he is not listed as the primary kick returner for the New Orleans Saints. Primary kick returner listed as Velus Jones Jr., and then the secondary guy is Kendre Miller. And Kendre Miller has shown that he can return pretty well over the course of his couple of opportunities, particularly last year. And meanwhile, Rashid Shaheed is still the lead punt returner in this case. But I think Velus Jones Jr., his breakaway speed, just elusive ability, you could see it all over the field when it came to the preseason. I think that he is in a position uniquely to have sort of this triple threat opportunity to have an impact on Sunday's game. And that includes the hidden yards battle in special teams and the very visible yards battle on offense. The second guy that comes to mind, of course, is at the edge rusher position. Of course, we're talking about that injury for Chase Young, and that might keep him off the field. So then the other guy for me becomes Chris Rumph, who flashed a lot over the course of the season, was a big-time preseason training camp standout, has been with Brandon Staley before, knows what it is that Brandon Staley wants in his defense, and I think could see a lot of opportunity here if Chase Young is out or even limited in such a way, because you're not going to want to just have Cam Jordan and Carl Granderson there wearing themselves down in the first game of the season. You're going to want to rotate. And so whoever it is they bring up from the practice squad, should they decide to do that, again, my guess for that is Fadil Diggs, and Chris Rumph would still get a lot of opportunities here. And so utilizing him as an early down pass rusher, as a third down pass rusher, however it is that you want to utilize him, I think he can have a big impact for you. Even if the stat sheet, if it doesn't show up big on the stat sheet, him just being there and being a guy that's going to be able to contribute and take up a blocker to allow for, one-on-one opportunities somewhere else, that can be a major contribution. His contributions to the run game will also be very important. He is a high energy, high motor, joyous player in terms of just him. You can tell he loves the game of football when he's out there. And those three things combined typically equal a guy that's ready to have an impact, right? And if he can bring some energy or bring more energy to the defense and then energize somebody else who then goes out there and makes a play, then that has a big time ripple effect too. So even on the intangible side, I can see Chris Rumph having a pretty big impact in this game. Finally, I'm calling him an X factor because he doesn't get talked about very much, but he plays a really important position. And I think a lot of fans are looking forward to seeing him. This was a guy that I almost picked for my debut, like the guy I was most excited to see debut as a New Orleans Saint. But I'm going to go with safety Julian Blackman. I could go Justin Reed, but of course I wouldn't consider Justin Reed an X factor. He is a primary, very important player, right? So I'm kind of cheating a little bit because Julian Blackman probably in that category too, but I'm going to call him an X factor just because he doesn't get his name called very often, right? He'll get his name called a lot by the New Orleans Saints in terms of opportunities on the field and all that kind of stuff, but he's not a guy that gets covered very much or a ton, not nearly as much as like a Justin Reed, for instance. However, I think I said Justin Reed both times. I don't think I said Eric Reed once today. Now, that one was on purpose. But Julian Blackman, 7 interceptions over the course of the last couple of years. He is a ball hawk. And so if the Saints can contain the run game a little bit and force Arizona to play from behind the sticks, can they take advantage of Kyler Murray as a passer by being opportunistic and taking advantage of maybe some opportunities that might be there for them up against a passing attack that's probably going to attack the middle of the field or try to attack the perimeter of the field because of Kyler Murray's stature. You kind of want him throwing over the middle of the field. And can Julian Blackman take advantage of that? Can he show his range? Can he show his speed, his athleticism, his ball hawking ability? It's a massive opportunity for him here. And so I think that Julian Blackman's another one of those guys that I think can be a major X factor in a secondary that's full of playmakers, right? Isaac Yiadom is one of the guys that has consistently forced incompletions over the course of his times here in New Orleans, going back to 2023. Kool-Aid McKinstry is the top corner, and he's a phenomenal corner. I'm really excited to see him get started here. And then he's got Justin Reed. So Julian Blackman becomes the other guy in a way, and he could be the one that makes the biggest plays at the same time. So really looking forward to seeing what all three of those guys can bring, and looking forward to more here on Locked On Saints. Don't forget to come and check us out over on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network, and go and check out our friends over at Locked On Pelicans, Locked On LSU, and Locked On SEC as well. We're going to have much more for you here throughout the week. Make sure that you're here with us as we are here with you every single Monday through Friday. Much more even ahead of Sunday's game. Can't wait to bring it to you. Coming up tomorrow, we'll have an episode to kind of break down everything going on with standard elevations and get you updated on the latest game designations from the injury report. Let you know who's in and who's out. We appreciate you very much as always, making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. If you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.